the colonial period. Again, we're still in the Spanish colonial period of the MVP history course. Last week, we had Professor Stuart Young, who spoke to us about the arrival of the early Chinese, that they were trading as early as 960 with the Philippines, and they rose to be the mestizo class by integrating themselves into Philippine society by intermarriage. So now we go to the Philippine Revolution with one of our favorite lecturers, Professor Michael Xiao. Professor Michael Xiao, he told me it's a brand name, Xiao. He is the assistant professorial lecturer at De La Salle University, Manila. Michael has a BA and master's degree in history and is a PhD anthropology candidate in UP Diliman. He is author and co-author of various popular and academic publications. He has spoken around the country about various historical topics and has been an occasional tour guide and historian on board. Michael is a historical consultant for various historical shows, dramas, and has promoted films like General Luna and Bonifacio, Unang Pangulo. He hosts his own daily segment in a Philippine news program called Xiao Time, watched by Filipino students and teachers here and abroad. He writes for the Manila Times every Saturday and for a Tagalog tabloid every Sunday. During this pandemic, Michael has been the most active public historian in Philippine television and in webinars as well. So let's give a warm welcome to Professor Michael Xiao.
Makasaysayang araw po, historic day to everyone. Thank you, Ma'am Aurora. Thank you to everyone. Thank you to the Museum Volunteers of the Philippines. I think ever since 2014, I have been invited by this group. So before, this was your collateral. This was your poster for the course. I think you are now more hip, I guess, because you have a better, you have a new attune with the times collateral here, and we went online. This is like, it's so historic because the very last time I was with MVP, that's a few days before the lockdown happened, last February.
Yes.
So I think that was a very memorable talk on the Marcoses.
Yes.
So if you have other questions, I can be contacted through Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I have websites but mostly Filipino, but they have photographs where you can use if you're curious about Philippine history and other materials in my website, xiaochua.net and bangkanisiao.wordpress.com. I have a YouTube page. There are some materials in English, so which you can watch, and I think might be useful in your journey to learn more about Philippine history. Well, as Ma'am Au said, I'm really a public historian in such a way that unlike other historians who have devoted their lives into more research and more academic writing, what I have done is I divide my time to being that and also making history more understandable to a general audience. So in many ways, in that sense, I'm not a total expert in many things, but more or less I can frame and I can explain in an easy manner these things. Now, it's a shameless plug that I have a book with Professor John Ray Ramos. It's called Bayani Biographies, Andres Bonifacio. Although it's a book for young adults, it contains the the updated version of Andres Bonifacio's life based on researches that are not in any other biographies of Bonifacio. Because what happened was there's so many things that are already new information in the past 20 years that were not included in the major Bonifacio biography. So we did a book for children and already updated it. That Jim Richardson, who is the expert on the Katipunan document, said that this book is the updated version, which of course, if you are a foreigner who wants to read about the Philippine Revolution, I think this would be a very good start. I am tasked to talk about not just the Philippine Revolution, but the larger context of the fight, the struggle for freedom against the Spaniards, which is rightly so. Although, I don't know, I hope that I do not take so much of your time, which I will try not to. But it's very important to what you call this, to trace the roots of Bonifacio's revolution to the past, to the culture and to the historical experience before him. Because Andres Bonifacio's idea of revolution did not emerge from, you know, just easily like that. It is a product of a historical process. And like, as you know already, taking this course, that history is not really just about singular events, but really contextualizing it to a larger context, that we get meaning from it because of that. So of course, the larger context is the Spanish disruption. I would not say that it's totally bad. You know, there were cultural things that we got from Spain that we should be thankful about. But more or less, it's really the ingenuity of Filipinos to adapt, to appropriate this positive impact and make them Filipino, including our religion, including our, you know, architecture and culture, which you may have discussed in other parts of this course. But we cannot, shall we say, deny that the Spanish disruption or this Spanish colonialism had its effects to the Filipinos that are not so good, in such a way that it became repressive. Some of these policies were, of course, land grabbing and encomienda, the easy way to do it, you know, the easiest term would be land grabbing. You have tributo, which is, you know, the paying of taxes, excessive taxes. Policy servicios, which is the 40-day, or which was the 40 days forced labor of men to very, very hard jobs or hard labor. You know, of course, they were fed, they were supposed to be paid, and you will see that in paper, the Spanish policies were actually very good. This is actually like paid work. But, you know, there was already corruption at that time, so some of those who were supposed to give the money were pocketing it, some people or some historians said, but they were being fed. Now, that had an effect on a lot of people, because these polo y servicios are taking away the men from the farms, from the towns. And because of this, there was famine in some areas where the men would be taken away to be brought to places where the galleons were being made. The other policy would be vandala. And vandala is a quota that is given to a certain province to produce rice, corn, or whatever, and they would be supposedly be paid, which is actually very good on paper, except that they were not paid in full, and sometimes were given promissory notes that accounted to nothing. So this bandala became the reason why Ilocos apparently became very poor. You know, we know Ilocanos as very thrifty, and it is because they said that because the terrain was actually bad. No. Before the coming of the Spaniards, the Ilocanos were actually trading with China. But what happened? It's because colonialism brought it down because of this quota system. And then, of course, these products that came from other countries in Asia and also produce that were produced by Filipinos would be then brought to the galleon trade and then will be transported to other parts of the world. And I will show you how that's done. And then you have conscription, which is basically the Spaniards getting voluntarios, they call them, but more or less it's parang, how do you say this? I don't say it's really forced, but it's mandated. It was mandated, and the conscription was done, and this actually hurt a lot of Filipinos because the Spanish troops, quote unquote Spanish troops, were actually quelling these revolts that we will talk about, were actually Filipinos, especially the Kapampangans and the people from Panay. The Kapampangans and the Panayanhons. They were the favorite soldiers of the Spaniards. The Panay soldiers, who used to be the Pintados, were very good in sea warfare, but the Kapampangans were very good in land warfare. So that is that. Now, so these are some illustrations actually from Latin America of some of the haciendas. Now, this is the galleon trade, the galleons that were used for the galleon trade, and this is a modern replica of that galleon. So you have a sense of the size. It's not really that big if you're going to compare it with today's vessels, but they were able to bring products from China. That's why it's the other name for the galleon trade was Nao de China. Nao is the boat. The galleon is called the Nao. So the Nao de China or the Nao de China travels from Manila and then to Acapulco, Mexico. And from Acapulco, Mexico, that's not the end. People say the Manila-Acapulco galleon trade, which is false. From Acapulco, the produce were, brought to other parts of Latin America. And from then on, they were brought to Spain. And remember that this became the longest trade route in the history of the world. The longest singular trade route, which the Spanish Crown route, they called it. So in this context, the galleon trade became the prime mover of Spanish economy in the Philippines. And those who what do you call this? They were the ones who really benefited from it were the Chinese merchants and the Spaniards, not the Filipinos, because the Filipinos, the produce that they give to the Spaniards were not, were like confiscated in many ways. So that was that. Now, for 200 years, that was the prime mover of Spanish economy. The only problem was, of course, the Mexican Revolution happened. And that stopped the galleon trade, basically, because, you cannot pass by Acapulco anymore. So, in this context, we have here the reactions of the Filipinos. Well, of course, one reaction is to accept it, to accept Catholicism, and to accept the colonial system. But the other, of course, basically reaction to it is to go to the mountains. And I know that in this course, you have been looking at ethnic identities and the culture of our indigenous Filipinos. These were actually the ones who ran to the mountains or they made to the mountains and they avoided Spanish contact or avoided Spanish colonization. So these people retained their culture. Now, the third reaction, so one is acceptance. The other reaction is to go to the mountains, and then they would become mountain people and they would be called bandits, bandidos. They would be called remontados, cimarrones, wild men. They would be demonized. They would be called aswang. They would be called, monsters, aswang, by the Spaniards. And also by the people in many ways. Especially those lowlanders who believed who went into the system. Now, so I'm going to talk about some of the revolts. Now, we will not talk about the details. I will talk about the big picture of the main revolts that we talk about in school. Now, there were more than 100 revolts before the Philippine Revolution itself, but these were the ones that would show us the various examples of why there were revolts, what were the manifestations of those revolts. So, well, we begin with the Tondo conspiracy, which was a conspiracy that was hatched by those who were supposed to become the new datus, but the Spaniards came. You know that Lacandula surrendered the Tondo Kingdom near Binondo, to the Spaniards. And so the Tondo people, they said, we will accept Spanish rule, but eventually they become disgruntled, and they said we should take back what we used to have. And so the relatives of Lacandula plotted, and they even talked to their allies to as far as Borneo, even to the Japanese. They talked to the Kapampangans, the people in Malabon. I think they also talked to the people in Palawan. So they assembled their old allies to plot against the Spaniards, except that, and this was 15 years after Legazpi got Tondo. That plan by Magat Salamat was compromised by someone. And of course, the Spaniards were so shocked. There were 15 years of colonization, and the Filipinos were already plotting. And so they arrested the leaders, beheaded them, took their properties, and their lands were shall we say, they placed salt in the land so that nothing more will bloom. No plants, no trees will bloom from those lands.
Mhm.
Frozen.
Now, I hope my internet is still okay.
You were
That was the, yeah. So you have Tamblot in 1622 in Bohol. This was in the Visayas, and wait a minute. Okay. Wait. Okay. Okay, Tamblot is a babaylan, a priestess from Bohol, and 2,000 people joined this. No, he's not a priestess. He's a babaylan, can be a man. So he's a male guy. He's a male priest. In 1622, 2,000 people joined him. So he wanted to go back to the culture of our ancestors. It's basically that. Okay. Now, of course, the problem was they burned the pueblo or the town. They burned the church. They destroyed the cross and the rosaries. They killed the priests, and they went back to the mountains. But of course, this rebellion was also quelled. And then you have the Bangkao revolt. The Sumuroy, revolt. And the Sumuroy revolt was in Samar. It was a reaction against the Polos y Servicios, where the Panay people were brought to Cavite to construct the galleons. But the underlying factor here is that Sumuroy was a son of a babaylan or a priestess. So his reaction was also religious. He killed the priests. He went to the convent and attacked it. They burned the church, and despite the fact that it was an economic reason for the revolt, the expression was religious. And then you have Tapang, who was again a male babaylan in Panay in 1663. The Diwatas, or the Bathala, the spirits, told him that if you go back to the old culture, you will be freed from the Spaniards. And so Tapar claimed to be God the Father. Tapar claimed to be God the Father. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm just actually, I'm not supposed to show you this. This is my guide. I did not know that it transferred already. Yeah. Yes, I'm now talking to you in English. I'm translating it. I'm sorry, I'm just supposed to read this. I'm not supposed to show you. I'll stop share, okay? So, you know, I really forgot actually that I was supposed to present on the other revolts. But I'm talking to you, I'm speaking to you and basically explaining to you already the context of these revolts. Now, Tapang was the nagpakita pala yung slides. Anyway, Tapang okay, sorry. Now, the revolt of Tapang was quite interesting because of its religious undertones. They claim that they were God. There was also a Virgin Mary in their camp. Inang Santissima, they call it, the purest mother. The Spaniards' answer to these revolts were harsh. The leaders were arrested, they were all beheaded, and the people of Tapar were fed to the crocodiles. But you see here already a pattern, which is that the, shall we say, the political reasons of the revolt. And people, historians before were just saying, you know, they were political revolts, or they were even personal revolts. But if you're going to look at the expression of these revolts, they were cultural and religious. And then you remember that a lot of our revolutions in the Philippines were inspired by faith. And of course, later on, that would be the argument of Reynaldo Ileto in his book, Passion and Revolution. Now, more political savvy was where the husband and wife team, Diego and Gabriela Silang. Now, Diego revolted in Ilocos when the British came to the Philippines. That was in 1762. And when that happened, they made the revolt simultaneous with the British occupation. But the problem was Diego Silang's revolt, although it became successful in Ilocos, he was killed by his own friend that was hired by the friars. A friend killed him, shot him. And then Gabriela Silang, the wife, took over the revolt. But the problem was, despite the fact that she was able to bring together the lowlanders and the highlanders, since Gabriela Silang herself was an indigenous person, she was an Itneg. That revolt failed, and all her leaders were executed, hanged before her. So she have to see the death of all her leaders before they herself hanged her. But she was shouting the words freedom against the Spaniards before she was hanged. And that's how, that's why Gabriela became the symbol of a Filipino woman who was fighting for her freedom. You will hear Gabriela a lot. The Filipino women are Gabriela Silangs. The longest revolt, which took place for 85 years and very successful, was the Gohoy's Revolt. 85 years, they were able to control the a lot of towns in Bohol. Now, the Basi Revolt is interesting because it came from, Basi is a sugarcane, is that right? It's a rice wine. It's a kind of wine from Ilocos. And when the Spaniards monopolized the sale of the Basi, those who were selling it among themselves made an underground economy and eventually decided, hey, we're going to unseat the Spaniards. And so they started to take back Ilocos towns from the Spaniards, one by one, killing the Spanish officers. And they were almost successful until they went to the river in near Bigan, the Bantaway River, and they were all slaughtered there. And the leaders, of course, were again hanged. And I will show you later an illustration about that. Now, another revolt would be the Bayot Brothers Revolt, and another one, the Andres Novales Revolts, were made, or were shall we say, were staged by the Spaniards who were born in the Philippines, the Insulares. These were Spaniards, but they started revolts themselves, 1822 and 1823. Of course, they were crushed, they were executed, but it is important to note that there is a reason why the Spanish Filipinos, quote unquote, suddenly rose up. There's a context to that, and we will talk about that a bit later. Hermanopolis Revolt was supposed to be a non-revolt because they were supposed to just be Catholic group who wanted to be recognized by the Spaniards. The Spaniards said, oh, these people, they only admit Filipinos, so maybe they are rebels. And so the Spaniards crushed this group and they have to defend themselves. And so it became a revolt. They won at first, killing the governor of Tayabas. This was in 1841, I mean. And eventually, what happened was that the 1841. Okay, sorry. I have to correct that. 1841. There. But the Spaniards counterattacked Hermanopolis forces and they were slaughtered brutally. And Hermanopoli himself was executed, he was shot, and they killed him. They killed him by, after, he was shot and killed him, and they chopped his body into four and cut his head and put it impaled it. And because of this, the people were, terrified. They put a sign in Hermanopolis ahead. I am Hermanopoli. I am a heretic. Do not wag niyo akong tularan. Do not imitate me. Don't be like me. So you see, you have here people who revolted. The Spaniards would answer brutally, and they would use Filipino forces, Indio forces, to crush them. So you will see how, and also because they did not have a national sentiment, that they were not able to become successful. And there, in this context, you will see the genius of Andres Bonifacio. Now, after Hermanopolis Revolt, the Tayabas Regiment, because the Tayabas people were the members of Hermanopoli, this regiment of Filipino soldiers, Indio, with Spanish officers, Insulares, they resented what happened to Puli. and they attacked Fort Santiago, January 19, 1843, which is the first successful Philippine revolt to enter and take over Fort Santiago, the headquarters of the Spanish army. But of course, they were crushed, they were executed. And January 20 was the day of reckoning. They got the fort for a few hours, and then January 20, they were crushed. But that was the very first successful revolt to take over Fort Santiago. And that's not even taught in schools. Now, this is eerie. January 20, 1843 was the Tayabas Regiment Revolt. Was the same day after about 20 years, 40, 60, 50, 60, after 30 years, around 30 years, Cavite revolted in the Fort San Felipe area, January 20, 1872. And you know the effect of this revolt. It was crushed, but 3 priests were implicated in this revolt. 3 priests who only wanted secularization of the parishes, which meant that the Spanish orders will leave the parishes. And secular priests, a lot of them Filipinos, would take over. But the friars did not want to surrender power. And that meant that the Cavite Mutiny, you know, became the opportunity to make the 3 priests the scapegoat. And they were executed publicly by garrote. And garrote was, you know, it was not strangulation. Garrote was you break the neck of a person through the screw. You do not behead it, you just break the neck. And they said that would make instant death. So this is the context of Andres Bonifacio's revolt. If you're going to look at the pattern, you will see that it's not just political, it's not just economic, there were cultural contexts in it. And what we're going to show is that Andres Bonifacio got inspiration and his concepts from these revolts in an unending consciousness from the time of our ancestors. This is now the context of the Philippine Revolution of 1896. And by the way, this is important to note because in many history books, it is still taught that 1872, the Gombursa execution was the roots or where you will root the beginning of the Filipino nation. And this is not the case. If you're only using 1872, that means that your vision is not, shall we say, it's quite narrow. If you're only using the political events of 1872 to root the 1896 revolution, you have to see it in the context of our culture. And that's where I would begin with Andres Bonifacio now. Okay, but before that, I will just show you pictures. These are the popular representations of Diego Silang, who was killed by his own friend. Gabriela Silang, who led the troops of Diego when he died and was herself publicly executed, but faced it with bravery, and that was told many times. The Goy's revolt was 85 years. He already died when the revolt fizzled, basically, because, you know, probably they were already tired, but they were able to control towns in Bohol for many years. This was the indigenous drawings a few years after the Basi revolt, where you will see, and this is in the National Museum in Vigan, where you will see how the Filipinos and the Spaniards prepared to face each other at the Bantaway River, where many of them were killed, they were buried, the leaders were rounded up, They were placed in the gallows, executed, and after the execution, their heads were their heads were cut off, placed in cages so that they can be displayed in intersections where people will see them. The context of the revolts of the mestizos or the Spanish Creoles, also the what we call the insulares, was the Cadiz Constitution of 1812, where it was mandated that all Spanish-blooded people have equal rights under the Spanish Constitution of Cadiz. Now, this was a short-lived republic, and we don't have time to contextualize why this happened. But this liberal constitution was different because before, the Peninsulares or the Spaniards born in Spain were high up in the social ladder. You see, in the hierarchy, they were above the Insulares. But the Insulares felt that they were second-class citizens, just as what happened in Latin America. That's why Simon de Bolivar revolted there. So the Andres Novales revolt and the Bayot brothers revolt also are contextualized here in the 1812 Constitution. The idea of equality was implanted. And people like Domingo Rojas, who was, and remember Domingo Rojas was a businessman. He was part of a group that campaigned for equality. And because of this, he was imprisoned many times. He was exiled and imprisoned many times. So Domingo Rojas became the business partner of Antonio de Ayala, and they created the Ayala Corporation, or at that time it was known as Casa Rojas, and eventually became Ayala Corporation. Rojas y Compañía. So Domingo Rojas supported Hermanopolis' bid to be legalized as a group. So that's the connection between Domingo Rojas of Ayala Corporation and Hermanopoli. Hermanopoli wanted to legalize his organization. Domingo Rojas gave his lawyers to him. So you see the connection of the aspiration. And Zeo Salazar even said that Filipino nationalism, you can even say that one of the precursors of that would be Domingo Rojas. Now, of course, that revolt failed, and Pule was executed. Now, we talk about Bonifacio, who was the heir of all these revolts and had a better idea on how we can overthrow the Spaniards. But the Filipinos' image of Bonifacio was that he was a poor guy who did not have education and therefore did not deserve to be a leader of a revolution. You know, he had very bad clothes. And why was that? He was not sophisticated. He was bobo or stupid. Some people would say. They would always say that Bonifacio was brave, but he was stupid. He did not deserve to be the leader. And we would like to contextualize that. People, what is the basis of this image? The image would be all around the country. They would be called Andres Bonifacio. But in fact, this statue was not Andres Bonifacio. It was actually a memorial dedicated to the heroes of 1896, which meant that this was actually a Katipunan warrior, not Andres Bonifacio. So when we look at this statue and think of Andres Bonifacio as very poor, lacked education, he was stupid, this was the bias of Filipinos against the poor. But it was not the case. Andres Bonifacio, if you're going to look at the photos of Andres Bonifacio, he had, he was a young urban professional. This was his only picture that was taken, or at least that we know of, that existed. And he doesn't look like the poor guy and the macho guy that people associate him to be. He actually looked like an intellectual. Photoshop, of course, before Photoshop, people can alter images and they can make the image more, acceptable. And this is what we now see as Andres Bonifacio. He was wearing coat and tie. He can change costume in the alteration of the photos. But now this is what they're doing already with the Adobe and the other technologies. He's also a hero in a way. Now, so this was the stereotype on the Katipunan. Because Bonifacio was stupid, the Katipunan that he created to wage the revolution was a movement of stupid people who rose up against the Spaniards. And they were just for violence. They wanted violence. And it was only limited to the Tagalog region. Their view was Katagalugan, Tagalog. It was a limited view. The Visayans were not included. Now, we are going to clarify all these things. So, as I said, these were the common misconceptions that are the same as the misconceptions with the Katipunan. So, in many ways, Bonifacio and the Katipunan are tied together. And that's why this gives us the impression that the overthrow of the Katipunan government is actually a just, or was a just cause. Who was Andres Bonifacio? He was actually a middle-class guy with a half-Spanish mother. The mother works at the cigarera, or the cigarette factory. The father, it's debatable what he was, but they said he was a lieutenant, or lieutenant in teniente mayor, which is the assistant of the gobernadorcillo of Tondo or Binondo. But he also had a job which is, banquero, or, he drives the boats. Now, Andres Bonifacio had 5 other siblings, 6 children of his parents. And the 2 parents died when Andres Bonifacio was about 22 years old. So, before the parents died, they already had a business of selling fans and canes. Now, the cane was not an ordinary cane, or the fans were not the cheap fans, but they were really classy canes that were used before. And this was one sample that I got from the family of the mother of Bonifacio. And the metal handle was already lost. But you still see that it's actually a very nice cane that he was selling, according if this cane is to be believed to be Andres Bonifacio's product. Now, being an entrepreneur was not enough. You have to also join other work. He became he sold tiles for a while, and then eventually entered a German trading company. The British trading company first, and then transferred to a German trading company. So as I said, he was a young urban professional. His pay was even higher than a school teacher at that time, because there was already public education in Spanish Manila at that time. So his salary was even higher than that. He was a person who mans the stocks in the warehouse. He also worked as a messenger in these companies, but he was paid very well. Because of this, he was able to read books, and these books exposed him to the events in world history, like the French Revolution, the Commune of Paris, the US Revolution, the books of Jose Rizal, and this widened his horizon. Andres Bonifacio, an Indio, was born an Indio, could have died without progress. like any other Indios before him. But he read. And in reading, he had hope that we can also be free like the Americans and like the French. This widened his horizon. Reynaldo Ileto said that European liberalism, although he learned it, did not become his expression of revolution. So this is where you will see that Rizal in a way was limited because of he was educated in a Western way and learned Western thought that he cannot communicate directly to the people. According to experts like Reynaldo Ileto and Zeus Salazar, Andres Bonifacio knew how to use his culture to communicate what he wanted to say and his vision of the country. Andres Bonifacio was a theater actor. He had his own street company of theater people, Teatro Porvenir. And his favorite theater, character was Bernardo Carpio. So Bernardo Carpio was a Spanish king or Spanish character who was appropriated by the Filipinos. And in their version of the story, he was imprisoned, Bernardo Carpio was imprisoned by the bad guys, the colonizers. And he was imprisoned in a mountain, between two mountains, which they believe was in Montalban. Now, what happened was, Andres Bonifacio went there in Montalban when he already established the Katipunan one Good Friday. So the interpretation was, despite the fact that it was a holiday, the people were conscious that we are also going to make the sacrifice of giving our lives like the Lord. But they went to Bernardo Carpio's place because the rumor was that Bernardo Carpio's feet, one feet was the only one that is shackled. Every time there was an earthquake, the earth moves. Bernardo Carpio was trying to be free. And there's only 1 feet left that is shackled. When he becomes free, he will save the Tagalogs from the Spaniards. And Andres Bonifacio toyed on that idea to make people go with him to revolt. And so he went there with his friends one Good Friday and declared independence inside one of the caves. So appropriating Bernardo Carpio's story. That's why Bonifacio, it's impossible that he was stupid. He was not. He was not. Zeus Salazar said that he actually got his ideas, his concepts from our ancestors. You remember our ancestors? To form the bayan, to form the political community, the bayan, the datos would drink a wine with their blood on it. They would wood themselves somewhere and drink their blood, and that would mean that the two communities would become the bayan. They would be one blood, sang dugo, brothers, kapatiran, brotherhood. Andres Bonifacio, what did he do? He appropriated the symbolism of the sandugo, that now the Katipuneros would write their oath. Sign their oath with their own blood to say that we are now the brothers under Inang Bayan. That's why they called their group Kataas-taasan, Kagalang-galang na Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan. The highest and most honorable association, Katipunan, association of the sons of the people. Mga anak ng bayan. Sons or daughters of the people. We are all brothers. That's what Andres Bonifacio wanted to convey. So the people got it. The people joined him in this revolution. So this is an oath signed by blood. Of course, this is pen, but the signature was in blood, in their own Katipunan cipher. Mama Aurora, you messaged me privately how much time I have left.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you.
Don't feel rushed.
So,
we're just hanging on to your every word.
Thank you so much. Don't worry. This will be done in due time.
Yeah. Take your time.
So I use this Thank you. I use this illustration to demonstrate that Andres Bonifacio's vision of the nation is actually we Filipinos treating each other as brothers and sisters, like the old bayan. See? And of course, the most perfect visual manifestation of the Filipino brotherhood was people power. And this is where I explain that there was the great cultural divide in the time of the Spaniards, as Zeo Salazar said, that when some Indios, because of the changes that happened during the, shall we say, the end of the galleon trade, where the traders come in, foreign traders come in, and gave more favorable jobs to Indios, jobs and businesses to Indios, trading partnerships to Indios. Some of them were separated from the people's culture and understanding. So those that were Western educated, like Burgos, like Rizal, like Del Pilar, they had their own ideas of liberalism, republicanism, of how this country would work, which was different from those that are from below. My goodness, wrong spelling. I just have to. Okay, there. So I hope you're still with me to see that this is a very valid point. There was a separation of, shall we say, idea. Wait a minute. Oh, there.
There are still 64 people listening to you. No problem.
Thank you so much. You see here, there would be different perspectives about how we could attain our freedom and our country, our nation. So the propaganda movement had their own idea, which is based on political rights, whereas Andres Bonifacio rooted his concepts to the concepts of our ancestors, to the concepts of Hermano Puli, of Tamblot, of Sumuroy, of Tapar, and on to his ideas of nationhood, which we would explore here. The Western concept of the Ilustrados, Zeo Salazar said it was nación. Some historians would say it's the pueblo Filipino people, pueblo soberano, sovereign people, is that the citizens have rights guaranteed under a constitution and a declaration of independence. So if you have the right to suffrage, for example, or the right to, to freedom of expression, that's already being free. That is enough. But for Andres Bonifacio, it should be more than that. And this is where the concept of Inang Bayan comes in, where it's a more family concept of a country. Now, let's talk about having bayan later, but let's go to kapatiran ng mga anak ng bayan. When you treat your brother as magkapatid, that is loving them. That is having mabuting kalooban with them. Mabuting kalooban means having a goodness. But kalooban is inside of you. So the goodness that comes from within is being reflected when you treat your countrymen as magkapatid. And according to Filipino psychology, that's where true kaginhawahan lies. That's where true well-being lies. And without kaginhawahan, there is no freedom. Kaginhawahan is everything to a Filipino. That's good health, good life, a comfortable life, peace of mind, kaginhawahan, ginhawa. That's food. Food is part of ginhawa. Sex is even part of ginhawa. I'm sorry if I said that word. But you will see that kaginhawahan is the prerequisite to feel your freedom. And in many ways, Andres Bonifacio was right. Even if you can vote, even if you have political rights, if you are not maginhawa, if you do not eat 3 times a day, then your freedom is useless. Kaginhawaan, kalayaan. And kaginhawaan comes from mabuting kalooban, goodness. People treating each other as brothers. Now, of course, some people say this is so idealistic. But again, these are values that Andres Bonifacio wanted people to understand. Because these are values that are already inherent in the Filipinos. At least in their consciousness. And this is where Andres Bonifacio coined the term Haring Bayan. And in many books, he was called the Haring Bayan, which is bullshit. I'm sorry for saying that word, but it's total bull. Total bull. And I should say this, Emilio Aguinaldo wrote it in his memoirs, total bull. That even in his camp, in Andres Bonifacio's Katipunan, some of them cannot understand his wordings because they were already too Western. He was not the Haring Bayan. The Haring Bayan was the people. Haring Bayan means, Hari means king, Bayan means people, and therefore the people are king. The people have power. And if you translate it to French, to Greek, that's demos kratos. Demos kratia. Democracy. Haring Bayan is Andres Bonifacio's concept of democracy, where the people and not one person is king. So again, it is important to point out that in the Katipunan, you are taught to have good values, good kalooban, good spirit. And you read the Kartilya. We don't have time to discuss the Kartilya ng Katipunan, but it's there. And then that leads to kaginhawaan. There is no kaginhawaan without matuwid na kaluluwa or righteousness or mabuting kaluluwa. This is in the Filipino psychology. And kaginhawaan breeds true freedom. That was Andres Bonifacio's concept of a nation. This is articulated in his writings along with Emilio Jacinto, his 18-year-old friend and secretary of the Katipunan. He articulated it in an anthem that he made Julio Nakpil write, "Mabuhay ang kalayaan at pasulungin ang puri at kabanalan." Now I can sing this. Mabuhay, mabuhay ang kalayaan, kalayaan, at pasulungin ang purit kabanalan, ang purit kabanalan. Kastilay, maining ng Katagalugan, at ngayoy ipagwagi ang kahusayan. If you're going to look at this, I just sang actually, what could have been the Philippine national anthem if Andres Bonifacio did not die? This was Bonifacio's anthem, made by Julio Nakpil. And it says here, and let's promote, long live our liberty, and let's promote honor and virtue, puri at kabanalan. Mabuting kaluluwa, mabuting kalooban, righteousness. Diba? At ngayon ipagwagi ang kahusayan. And now let's strive for excellence, ladies and gentlemen. Not kabobohan, not stupidity. So we always say, oh, I like Jose Rizal because he was intelligent. I like Jose Rizal because he was for peace. Bonifacio was a war freak. No. War was the last option. The aim of the Katipunan is to create a nation that's promoting honor and virtue and kaginhawaan. I hope that is clear. If you're going to look at the Kartilya ng Katipunan, this is the actual photo of the document of the Kartilya. It tells you the aims of the association. In the second part, Katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan to those who want to join this association. The second part reads, this association pursues a most worthy and momentous object to unite the hearts and minds of all the Tagalogs by means of an inviolable oath, in order that this union may be strong enough to tear aside the thick veil that obscures thought and to find the path of righteousness. Katwiran, matuwid na kaluluwa, righteousness, or reason, katwiran, reason, and kaliwanagan, enlightenment. Ladies and gentlemen. So, the true object of the Katipunan is really to create a nation based on katwiran, kaliwanagan, righteousness, reason, and enlightenment. And united, to unite the hearts and minds. And to take away those that blind us, which means we should pursue true education. This is the concept of Bonifacio. But sir, the Cebuanos would say, oh, dili kami kasama dyan sa sinasabi ni Bonifacio na yan. Bisaya kami, Cebuano, hindi kami kasama dyan. Tagalog lang yan. It's only the Tagalogs who are there. We're not included. And the Kapampangan would say, oh, kami kaya beken, no, kami lang yung Kapampangan, no, treng Tagalog mo. Why are the Kapampangans not there? And this is where this is where the misunderstanding lies, that the Bonifacio's concept of nation and Jacinto, the Katipunan, was limited to Tagalog only. But if you're going to look at the document, there was an asterisk in the Tagalog word. And you will see a footnote. Kumbaga, nag-footnote pala yung lolo mo. In the footnote, it says, the word Tagalog means all those who came from this archipelago. Therefore, even a person who is a Visayan, Ilocano, or Pampango, etc., is therefore a Tagalog too. Because Tagalog, in Bonifacio's terminology, was Taga-Ilog, or people from the river, which is basically the Austronesian people. Bonifacio had the concept of a nation and very well articulated in his writings with Emilio Jacinto, his friend. The second page of this document tells us of the very first commandment of the Katipunan. And it says here, one of the foremost rule here is true love of the native land and to have lubos na pagdadamayan or genuine compassion for one another. So how do you show your concern for the kapatid or the brother? The first commandment is to love. The first commandment of the Katipunan is to love. In the Decalogue of the Katipunan, this is Andres Bonifacio's wonderful handwriting because he was manning the warehouses and have to, record the stocks. Beautiful handwriting. Beautiful. You will see the Decalogue. And the first lines of the Decalogue said, believe with a fervent heart in the Creator and reflect always that a sincere faith in Him involves love of one's native land, because this shows true love for one's fellow. Andres Bonifacio's Decalogue says, love of country, threefold: love of God, love of native land, and love of your fellow man. Look at this. I hope you remember this. And I'm going to the conclusion already. Andres Bonifacio wanted us to have a concept of freedom that is based on loving each other as the beginning of freedom. Because when you love other people, you will not do evil things against them. And when we do that to each other, then we'll have more. When we love our country, love our fellow man, there will be more understanding. Of course, it's a very idealistic thing. You know, it will not happen. But when your citizens are taught this, they at least will have that idea in mind always at the back of their minds. What is true freedom according to Emilio Jacinto? Emilio Jacinto wrote a manifesto, and there was a story where Kalayaan appeared to a young boy and introduced herself to the young boy. An appearance of Kalayaan. He said, do you want to know who I am? Then listen. I am the source of all the things that are greatest, most beautiful and laudable, most dignified and precious, to which humanity can aspire. For me, crowned heads fall. For me, thrones are toppled or seized, and crowns of gold destroyed. For my cause, men unite, each one forgetting his own personal interest and seeking nothing but the common good. For me, slaves are rescued and lifted up from the mire of degradation and shame, the pride and malice of their cruel masters broken. And from me springs the thinking that probes and discovers the secrets of science. Whichever I rule, tears of suffering are dried, a chest once drowned by tyranny and cruelty can again breathe freely, humingang maginhawa. Who am I? My name is Kalayaan. Ooh, I get emotional reading this. I get more emotional when it's in Tagalog. Look at that. What's the freedom? It is the cause for which men unite, each one forgetting his own personal interest and seeking nothing but the common good. To be free is not really to get what you want, to do what you want. But to be free is that for each one of us to take care of each other so that we can really live happy. So, true freedom is when men unite, or men and women unite, they forget his own personal interest and seeking nothing but the common good. Wow. So, for me, the main Andres Bonifacio argument for nationhood is kapatiran, kabutihang loob, kaginhawaan, kalayaan. At ang batayan na yan ay pag-ibig. Brotherhood, goodness, well-being, and true freedom, which is all based on love. This was articulated by Andres Bonifacio, and this was the reason why he established in the Cry of Balintawak. And after that, the day after, the first revolutionary government in which he was president. The Cry of Balintawak, Aurelio Tolentino said, according to Aurelio Tolentino, Bonifacio shouted, freedom or oppression, life or death. Brothers, we will come against rifles and cannons to take back our freedom. Mga kapatid, mabuhay ang Katagalugan. Now, of course, that's the argument that we say that Milagros Guerrero said. That's the argument where I agreed with my mentor Milagros Guerrero that Andres Bonifacio should be considered the first president because he established the first government. And I will just rush this. This was the book that I did with Dr. Guerrero for the film Bonifacio Unang Pangulo. It is stated that there are documents that shows us that Bonifacio's government actually worked or operated as such, and that he was called President Pangulo ng Haring Bayang Katagalugan, of the sovereign nation of Tagalog. Andres Bonifacio, nicknamed May Pag-asa in the Katipunan, that's his May Pag-asa means hopeful. Because before May Pag-asa, there was no hope. So he was the hopeful one. President of the Haring Bayang Katagalugan, democracy of the Tagalogs, or sovereign people of the Tagalog. See? And this is his signature. In a newspaper, he was called the President of the Tagalog Republic. And this was before Emilio Aguinaldo was elected in the Tejeros Convention. Now, I will not explain all of this, but basically I want to show you that there were documents that were found recently that tells us of his concept of government and how he ran his government. When he went to Cavite, a government in Antipolo remained with the Haring Bayang Katagalugan, operated by Emilio Jacinto as the military commander and Julio Nakpil as the leader of the council. There were elections that were held as documented. These were documents that were confiscated by the Spaniards. The Filipino historians did not have access to this before until Jim Richardson. I mean, at least widely. There were Filipino historians who look at these documents, but they weren't able to copy it. But now we have the scans, and we're able to see that they have the birth certificates, marriage certificates signed. They operated as a government. They were appointing fiscals. They were ordering troops and people. They were conducting diplomacy with the Japanese. It ran as a government. So Bonifacio had the government. And the definition of Haring Bayan was a democracy, a nation. Now, we will skip this and basically just go to the end. You know what happened already? There were two factions in Cavite that were having an infighting, and Andres Bonifacio just came to resolve it. In the end, he became the victim of that. Infighting. Because one of the groups, Magdalo, started to think that he was siding with the other side, Magdiwang. He was not. He was the president of all of them. But even in the books, people were wrong by saying Bonifacio was Magdiwang. He was not Magdiwang. He was the president of all of them. But because of this misunderstanding of what he really stood for, of the Haring Bayan in itself, where they called him king instead of the nation as king, and they thought that he wanted monarchy, they wanted to crush him. And so they had an electoral coup that placed Emilio Aguinaldo in Tejeros. He accepted it, as was agreed upon, but when he was elected again as in a lower position as Interior Secretary or Director of the Interior, he got mad because he was insulted as someone who did not have any education by this guy. And so Andres Bonifacio challenged Tirona to a duel, pointed a gun at him, but Tirona went out. And that is the reason why Andres Bonifacio nullified the convention. And the next day, he set up his own government, meaning he's continuing his presidency. But the people in the convention that were left said, we're continuing this convention and we now elect Aguinaldo as our leader. And so there were two leaders of the revolution. it's your perspective already who's the legitimate one. Because for me, it was Bonifacio. But the problem was the Aguinaldo people thought otherwise. And they said Bonifacio is running a renegade government. And so eventually, to cut the long story short, they arrested him. They arrested him with this guy. They first said that they were friends and they were fed by Bonifacio. But after Bonifacio fed them, they started attacking Bonifacio's men. They killed Andres Bonifacio's brother, Ciriaco, point blank. Andres Bonifacio, although he was telling these people, what is happening, brothers? Please, please, let's talk about this. They shot him in the shoulder, and then someone stabbed him in the neck. And of course, there were some rumors that after that, Andres Bonifacio's widow was taken into a house. Actually, Gregoria de Jesus, the wife of Bonifacio, said he was taken into a house and she stopped her story there. And of course, the assumption of some was that she was raped. And so, where was Kapatiran in all of this? They did not even heal his wounds. They left it and it had gangrene. He cannot walk anymore. He was so weak to walk, too weak to walk. And they imprisoned him in a Bartolina in the Naik convent, in which Santiago Alvarez says, one of the generals of the revolution, the captors subdued the weakened Supremo and laid him on a hammock. They bound Ciriaco, the Supremo's brother, rounded up the others, and brought all of them to Indang. And from Indang, they proceeded to Naik, where they locked the Bonifacio brothers in a narrow, dark room under the stairs of the Friar Estate house. The thick wooden doors of the stone cage were barricaded and strictly guarded by loyal troops. The two prisoners were not allowed any visitors and were prohibited from talking to anyone. In the 3 days they were detained, they were fed only twice with food that had better not be mentioned at all. So this is the father of the revolution, the first president of the first revolutionary government, being treated like an animal. The site is still there in Naik Elementary School. We believe that it is the same door that was used, the same stone, the same stones are still there. We placed a marker there because there was no marker that says that before that this is where it happened, but we placed a marker there, and eventually they placed 2 statues. Because before they made it a room of the janitor where all the mops and the cleaning agents were there. And Gregoria de Jesus, of course, was molested. Those the one who arrested Gregoria de Jesus and Bonifacio, they really wanted to rape her. There was a moment where he was just stopped. So Procopio Bonifacio and Andres Bonifacio were tried in another town, Maragondon, and this is when we were divided as a revolution when the Spaniards were already winning in Cavite. At first, Aguinaldo was winning, but the reinforcements came, and the time that we have to be united, the revolution was divided, and Cavite eventually fell to the Spaniards. In the process, they tried Andres Bonifacio, and it was humiliating because the stories were leaking in the Spanish press that there was division in the Philippine Revolution and that they were trying the one who founded them. It was not actually a secret trial. It was a public trial, but the sentence was secret. They did not inform Bonifacio of the sentence. And so what happened? Emilio Aguinaldo, in this document, he was already the president, of course, the other president, considered commuting the sentence to banishment because, you know, Andres Bonifacio is still the father of the revolution. So can we just put them under guard in Pico del Oro? But you know what happened? Some people talk to them, and they used to talk to Bonifacio, but eventually, of course, they were Aguinaldo people who used to talk to Bonifacio and sided again with Aguinaldo. General Mariano Noriel and Pio del Pilar, who told Bonifacio, Aguinaldo, and I will translate it. I'm sorry I wasn't able to put it in writing here, but I will translate it. And this was Aguinaldo's statement in 1948, a few years after the events happened. But this was his story. When General Mariano Noriel and Pio del Pilar heard, these were the members of the War Council, heard that I commuted the sentence, they called my attention and told me, if you want to continue the harmony of our government or revolutionary government, and if you still want us to be alive, please take back the commutation that you gave those two brothers. Bawiin niyo ang ginawad na indukto sa magkapatid na yan. And dahil dito'y aking binawi at iniutos ko kay General Noriel na ipatupad ang kahatulan ng Consejo de Guerra na barilin ng magkapatid alang-alang sa kapakanan ng bayan. And because of this, I ordered General Noriel to implement the sentence of the War Council to shoot the brothers for the sake of the nation. And so, with this order by Emilio Aguinaldo, on May 10, 1897, Lazaro Macapagal brought the father of the Philippine Revolution and his brother to the mountains. The official version was that they were read the sentence and on this place, and when they were read the sentence, Andres Bonifacio begged for his life. Lazaro Macapagal said, I'm sorry, I'm only doing my job. They shot Procopio first, and then Andres Bonifacio ran like a coward, and they shot him. But there was an alternative story that came out. You know, there's a famous joke among kids. It's a poem called Andres Bonifacio, Atapang a Tao. Andres Bonifacio, a brave man. Aputola paa, hindi atakbo. Ay aputola kamay, hindi atakbo. They cut the hands, he did not run. Aputola kamay, hindi atakbo. Aputola paa, hindi atakbo. They cut the feet, he did not run. Of course, he will not run. They cut the feet already. And then it became bastoso. Aputola outen, natakbo atulen. They cut the male organ and he ran. But this is a joke, yes. But they said that this has basis based on folklore and on an unconfirmed story by two Katipuneros to General Masangkay saying that because they did not want to waste bullets, Procopio Bonifacio was shot, but Andres Bonifacio was hacked to death. Now, it doesn't matter to me what version to believe. What is important for me is what we lost when we lost him. The wife of Bonifacio went to the wilderness searching for her husband. Because when she saw the executioners and asked, "Where is my husband?" and they did not even tell her. She was searching the wilderness for 2 weeks. Eventually, they found some bones in that site, but it did not match the age of Bonifacio and his brother. And so some people would say that this was fake. But, you know, it doesn't really matter. What is important is what we lost during that time. We lost kapatiran, kabutihang loob, kaginhawaan, tunay na kalayaan as the concept of the nation. And it was replaced by the elite democracy that we learned from the West that we still have in today's work, in today's Philippines in operation. And my message to all of us is this. A lot of you are Filipinos, a lot of you are foreigners, but you're interested in our country. You're interested in our story. And in many ways, this is your home, away from home. And therefore, this is our home. Andres Bonifacio wanted us not just to die for our country, but also to live for our country. And as he said, diligence in the work that gives sustenance to thee is the true basis of love. Love for your own self, your wife and children, for your brothers and countrymen. How do you love your country? Is to do your best. Be the best that you can be. Because if not, if we will not cherish our freedom like some people who would say, do we really need freedom or do we need discipline? Why? Because the concept of freedom is to smoke in public places, to violate traffic rules, to throw litter everywhere, to drink and drive. That is a subversion of the Katipunan's version of freedom. Kinalilimutan ng bawat isa ang pansariling pakinabang at walang ibang nababanggit kundi ang higit na kabutihan ng lahat, the common good, and that you forget your own selfish agenda so that others and you will live. For my cause men unite, each one forgetting his own personal interest and seeking nothing but the common good. If we are not going to implement Andres Bonifacio's concept of nation, at least even in our own self, in our own surrounding, in our own sphere of influence, I'm afraid that we continue to shoot and we continue to stab him, the father of the Filipino nation. I do not want to end in a negative note. On a positive note, Andres Bonifacio's revolution started eventually the first constitutional democratic republic in Asia, which was established by Emilio Aguinaldo. Because if he did not revolt, the revolution will not happen. And so from Aguinaldo taking over power from Bonifacio, Aguinaldo took the helm, negotiated with the Spaniards in Biak na Bato, late 1897, but that was to get more strength to wage another revolution when they came back. In 1898, he declared Philippine independence when people were already winning in different parts of the country, and we won that revolution. And we established the first democratic republic in Asia. And when that happened, the Americans, of course, became interested with us. We waged another war against the Americans. It would be about 60 more years before we get our freedom. But still, at least, at the very least, or 50 years before we get our freedom, but at least we're able to show the world that we are a great people and that we are deserving of independence. Despite the fact of our hard nascent or hard childbirth as a nation, that we still made it. And we are now the Filipino nation, at least in part, because of what our heroes, Bonifacio, did for us. Thank you very much. Mabuhay tayong lahat.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much indeed.
Wow, that was a riveting story. And now we have maybe about 15 minutes for questions. So, quickly, does anyone have questions? We have only maybe another 15, 20 minutes. Anyone? before. All right, Purnima, let's go.
I'm so hungry.
Dr. Chua, it was a very passionate session that you took, and it was so nice to see you so passionately talking about Andre Bonifacio. I share your sentiment a lot because I always have a confusion between who is actually the father of the nation, Rizal, Jose Rizal, or Emilio Aguinaldo, or is it Andre Bonifacio? The story of Andre Bonifacio is very inspiring, very motivating. So, we would still like to have your views why you would not want Jose Rizal to be the father of the nation, and you would call Andre Bonifacio as the father.
Well, I just consider Bonifacio the one who really articulated nationhood in the terms of that Filipinos understand. And that's why he was able to gain members in the Katipunan. But I do not discount Rizal as one of our fathers. Because like Benedict Anderson said, the idea of being one people was articulated very well by the propagandists, the Western educated propagandists, that they wrote this in La Solidaridad, in the Noli Me Tangere, in the El Filibusterismo, in which Bonifacio was also drawing ideas from. I would not say that without Rizal there would be no Bonifacio. I would not say that. But it's a historical fact that Rizal was one of the inspirations of Bonifacio. And so, you know, if I consider Bonifacio the father of the Filipino nation, as some historians would do, because, you know, Rizal is already have a big place in our history as the national hero. He's the national hero. But all of them are fathers of the nation, including Aguinaldo. I'm so sorry to say. I mean, Aguinaldo, he made bad decisions. I really do not like him. I don't like him. But I appreciate him. Aguinaldo gave his role in our history. He took the mantle of leadership at a very young age when all around him were traditional politicians wanting to, you know, just order him around. But he took charge. He won battles for our country. He gave the flag and the national anthem to the Philippines, that we still cherish those national symbols. So in many ways, I appreciate Aguinaldo. You know, I'm not into the business of demonizing, not even Marcos. You know, you just learn from their mistakes and wrongdoings, and learn also from their contributions. Appreciate each one as personalities in history. That's why sometimes I think that the debate if someone is a hero or not is sometimes not very helpful, because sometimes we tend to make heroes as saints, which they were not. Diba? And then we cancel them in so much cancel culture in the world today. When you just had one fault in your lifetime, a stupid thing that you did when you were young will be brought up, and all your great things that you did will be canceled. I think that's bullshit. You call out people, yes. You correct them, yes. You don't give them a chance. I don't understand anymore. So yeah, I mean, I don't think that Aguinaldo is a hero, but that's only my personal, I do not impose that to the nation. But what I think is Aguinaldo also contributed to this country, and we should appreciate that.
Thank you. Very
Thank you.
convincing. I understand that you call him the father of revolution. And I think the concept, the philosophy was given by Jose Rizal, and Aguinaldo carried on the march. So, well, all of them have to be appreciated.
Very briefly, I would say that what Bonifacio did was to translate Rizal's ideas to a more understandable way for the people. So for example, Pag-ibig sa Tinubuang Bayan was actually Rizal's essay in the Diaryong Tagalog, which Bonifacio made into a poem. Now, Rizal's Morga, Sucesos, his idea of what Philippine history was, Andres Bonifacio translated into ang dapat mabatid ng mga Tagalog, what the Tagalog should know. It is an essay about the three-part Philippine history. So Bonifacio was doing all this and also adding his own input, making a unique philosophy for the revolution with Emilio Jacinto, no? To be able to guide the revolution, which eventually Apolinario Mabini would carry on even to the Malolos Republic. We have evidence of this, adding naman the Western sensibilities because Mabini was an educated guy. So you have here, so we're not rejecting Western democracy here. What we're saying is you have to understand it side by side with Filipino perspective. And when you have those two, Western democracy, liberalism, and the way we look at our country and our culture, then you have a fuller understanding of what Filipino aspires for in their country. Because the problem is a lot of the elites, and we're not putting down elites here, no? There are so many elites in that love their country, but there are some people who have very good intentions, but they even call the people bobotante for voting for some people, which I think, people have a reason, historical reason why they vote for such personalities. Not because they are bobo, but because they see something in their culture with this person. And so even if I don't agree with how the people elect their leaders sometimes, you have to understand culture so that you will appreciate why they make such decisions.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I really love your passion for the way that you present your case. Thank you so much.
I'd like to ask a question, Professor. Who began or who promoted this destruction of Bonifacio's image?
Okay. Aguinaldo and Bonifacio were friends. So I do not blame Aguinaldo for that destruction. I believe that it was started even before Andres Bonifacio was alive by people like Daniel. So I'm sorry, I mean, you might be friends with the relatives, but historically it was Daniel Tirona who hated Bonifacio so much that he started bad-mouthing Bonifacio to the leaders of Cavite. So because of this guy and his other friends, not even Aguinaldo fell victim to this ploy. Andres Bonifacio was downplayed. They said he did not have education. They even said he was a Mason to destroy him, which was odd because Aguinaldo was a Mason and a lot of them were Masons. That's really mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. They just wanted to destroy him. So, just to continue, after the revolution, because Aguinaldo was still head of the veterans, in many ways, Aguinaldo was a very, in all fairness to Aguinaldo was a silent operator. He was very silent. He was not a flamboyant person. He did not do anything to destroy Bonifacio himself until he released his memoirs. That was the very first time he talked about him. In fairness to Aguinaldo, he did not, but a lot of historians and people have deference for Aguinaldo when he was still alive. And he lived a very long life. He even, naabutan pa niya yung Beatles. So, 1964. So, because of that, some people were more courteous, or shall we say even, ang tawag doon, pandering to Aguinaldo in downplaying Bonifacio. But because of politics, some people also used Bonifacio, one, to promote being close to the masses like Quezon. Quezon promoted Bonifacio. So because he wanted to be close to the masses. Because Bonifacio represented the masses. Even if he was middle class, he represented the working class. But when Aguinaldo became a challenger in the Commonwealth elections, Quezon used the death of Bonifacio against Aguinaldo. So that was that. So the politics of the day actually, shall we say, contributed to how these heroes were seen. And of course, the Americans they also rode in the popularity of Rizal. That's why they promoted Rizal. But you know, he was already a national hero to the people, except that the Americans encouraged it more because it was like so convenient for them that Rizal wanted education, not revolution. But the Filipino politicians, including Quezon, promoted Bonifacio. So that was that.
Yeah, since Aguinaldo ordered the killing of Bonifacio, he would promote this black propaganda against him to justify his killing.
In all fairness to Aguinaldo, in the immediate aftermath of Bonifacio's execution, he only spoke once to a reporter before he boarded a ship to Hong Kong. And he told, I think it was an American reporter, I forgot already the name, and he said, you know, Bonifacio, he was a cruel man that I ordered shot. That was the quotation. After that, he never spoke against Bonifacio again publicly. And he only wrote his side of what happened during the revolution when mga Gunita ng Himagsikan was written, and I think it was even released after his death. That was the only time he said, this is what happened with me and Bonifacio and all of that. He gave interviews to Teodoro Agoncillo, which became part of the book Revolt of the Masses. And that is where his side of the revolution was also publicized. That was in the 1950s. But Aguinaldo, again, in all fairness to him, did not publicly, and you know, this is something eerie. In one of the parts of Bonifacio, of Aguinaldo's house, and I asked the people there how long that photo or that image in the one of the halls was, how long was it placed? Because the image shows Jose Rizal and Andres Bonifacio together in Emilio Aguinaldo's house. It's still there. You can visit it there. In the Hall of the Generals, you will see Rizal and Bonifacio at the top of the door. And I said, did Emilio Aguinaldo put that?
Yeah.
In many ways, he's still, and if you're going to believe Teodoro Agoncillo, in the very last chapter of his work, Aguinaldo was still looking up to Bonifacio as the one who started the revolution. So maybe he regretted it a bit, I guess.
And how could the two forces, Magdiwang and Magdalo, you know, how, again, was it regionalism?
Okay, very good. You know, there's no regionalism in the in the fight between the two factions, because they were all Cavite factions. They were not even national factions. They were just Cavite factions. Now, I will tell you a story that was not highlighted in the books, not even in Agoncillo's book. The Magdiwang was the original sangguniang bayan ng Cavite, or the provincial chapter of the Katipunan. Magdiwang. The problem is Magdiwang was headed by the Alvarezes, and the Alvarezes were relatives to Gregoria de Jesus, wife of Bonifacio. That's why you see why they connected the two. Okay. But the original Magdiwang sanggunian, under it was a new chapter called Magdalo. It used to be a small chapter under Magdiwang. But what happened? And this is interesting. Magdalo of Aguinaldo, Baldomero Aguinaldo, cousin of Aguinaldo, was the head. But one of the real leaders was Emilio himself. They started recruiting the local hacenderos. And these local hacenderos, and this is nice. You get the hacendero to agree to join you, and his farmers are already your men. And then you promote the Hacendero, a general. So you have a general with his own troops already, very faithful to him, fighting for you. But they never considered themselves member of the Katipunan. That is actually the root cause of what happened there. People were saying, we're not Katipunan. Why are we going to submit to Bonifacio? Our leader is Emilio Aguinaldo. Why are we submitting to the Alvarezes? We're not submitting to them. We're submitting to Aguinaldo. So you will understand why they did not want to follow Bonifacio at all. Because they were never Katipunan anyway. So this is what happened there. And also because Andres Bonifacio committed a human rights violation. This is rarely talked about. And of course, in a revolutionary setup, there were some mistakes that are bound to happen. And what are the violations? Andres Bonifacio and his men rounded up a few friars in Cavite, and some of them have very bad reputations, and executed them. And remember that some historians would say there's nothing wrong with it, because the friar was the symbol of Spanish oppression in the Philippines. But you know, who knows if some of them are good? They were executed, all of them. And so this is, according to one memoir, the reason why Emilio Aguinaldo became so disappointed with Bonifacio. It is because the Caviteños, you know, are very religious people, and they killed the priests.
But is it true that Bonifacio executed those friars or his men?
He ordered the executions of those friars, so in a direct way, he was part of it. That is unfortunate. And he's not perfect. I would not have agreed with it, but some historians would say, in a revolutionary situation, you have to make a statement. It's like the Hooks killing Doña Aurora, despite the fact that the Doña Aurora Aragon Quezon was a very revered, very nice person. Why do you kill him? It's senseless in many ways. I wouldn't agree. I wouldn't agree if Bonifacio is here. He said, don't do that. But, you know, we were not there. And, you know, in a revolutionary situation, they wanted to make a statement against the Spaniards.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And any other questions? Pandy, you're there, ready to shoot off a question, I think. Ching?
Ria is unmuted. Ria?
Yeah, Professor, hello. That was a very interesting, very interesting insight into Aguinaldo and Bonifacio. One thing that I noticed, most of those putting down Bonifacio were actually memoirs of Aguinaldo, which was later released. So don't you think it could be propaganda done by Aguinaldo, designed to completely, you know, eradicate Bonifacio even up to the end of his life, because he could not release it while he was still alive. So it was released after his death. What are your thoughts on that? As they say that history is written by the victors. And in this instance, it was Aguinaldo.
Well, you just
And
have
now
to be
we learn
critical
our
in any
history
memoir.
that way.
Yeah, in any memoir.
And we are giving a lot of, And we are giving a lot of weight on the memoirs of Aguinaldo.
Exactly.
Which became the bedrock of our history, which is taught to us when we were in school.
Exactly. Because, you know, again, history is lopsided for those who are able to write their memoirs. Bonifacio was not able to write his memoirs. We can only rely on his friends, Artemio Ricarte, Santiago Alvarez, who was actually, Santiago Alvarez's memoir is tricky because it's pro-Bonifacio, when we all know that the Alvarezes did not do anything to prevent Bonifacio's execution. So I'm very sorry if there are Alvarez relatives here. The Alvarez memoirs is actually meant to clean their shit, not doing anything with the Bonifacio execution. And in fact, the Alvarezes sided with the Magdalo when the reorganized government happened, which of course, you know, Bonifacio became so upset with that. But when, after many years, Santiago Alvarez, the son of Mariano, creates a memoir that praises Bonifacio and damns Aguinaldo, you know, we get the impressions of Bonifacio with people like Pio Valenzuela. So we can only recreate all of these things to create a narrative of Bonifacio along with these very scant letters and writings. But Aguinaldo, and remember this, all memoirs are, even if I'm going to write my memoir, you can always say it's propaganda because, you know, you will always make yourself good, feel good, look good, or at least justify the things that you did bad. It's natural. So what I'm here, ladies, what I want to talk about here, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you are an educator, you have to teach your kids how to recognize perspectives. You cannot just cancel Aguinaldo's memoirs because that's his perspective of what happened. You can say it's propaganda, yes, but what historians do is that you put all these memoirs together and look at the parts where there are at least one or two or three or four people saying the same thing. Is that's the correct version? You see, that's more or less closer to the truth. So I guess I would not want. I would say, oh, my internet is unstable. But basically, it's like that. You have to realize that all memoirs are propaganda for those who write it. So you just have to be perceptive of what you're going to accept based on other versions.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. That's wonderful.
Okay, maybe we have two last questions. If there's anybody else. Well, I have another one because we were talking about Nick Joaquin
Yes.
the other day, and he wrote the book A Question of Heroes, where he's supposed to demystify our national heroes. And I just
Yes.
want to ask you, a historian, how factual it is. Because I have to read it. I'm looking forward to reading it, but I'd like your thoughts.
I really have no problem with Nick Joaquin's opinions. He might not have the grassroots perspectives of historians after him because he was not a historian. He was really a writer. You can say he's a historical writer. The main problem with Joaquin is that even if his observations were valid and his facts were valid, you do not know where he got them because there were no footnotes. Diba? So they were actually magazine essays for a magazine series on heroes, on national heroes. So of course, when you become a historian, you will eventually realize where he got those informations. But a common ordinary person who reads it will not know where he got those sources, which of course is still valid because he's doing public history, not academic history. That's why we have to separate academic history and public history, and sometimes I bridge the two in many ways. But Nick Joaquin's work, A Question of Heroes, is actually valid. For me, I accept a lot of the things there. But what Joaquin lacks was, because he was very Hispanista in a way, he was not down to earth when it comes to local concepts, which Zio Salazar, Milagros Guerrero, for example, and other historians would later enrich the discourse with. So yeah, I don't cancel Joaquin. Some historians don't like him, but I love Nick Joaquin actually as a historical writer. He's a very good historical writer. He very understandable and very revolutionary. I just did not agree with what he said, that you know, there were the revolution of Caviteños and the revolution of Manileños, and you know, some of those things. But these are mere interpretations that we can disagree with him. But I think in general it is okay.
Okay. Well, anybody else before we close this meeting?
Yes, may I?
Yes, go ahead quickly.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for a very wonderful lecture. May
Thank you.
I ask this? Where General Antonio Luna and Andres Bonifacio not threats to the leadership of Aguinaldo then?
Sorry, what? Not a threat.
Yes, threats. Panganib.
Well, they were. That's the problem. They were. You know, as I said in the lecture, and as Aguinaldo wrote it, the two generals told him that if you still want to live, kill the two brothers. So that means they were threatened.
Yes.
Or they threat? That's the question. Okay. This is my interpretation of what happened. You know that Bonifacio was already running away from the gulo. He already knew that Cavite doesn't accept him, even if his efforts to defend Cavite were there. So what happened? He was already going far away. And when they arrested him, he was already in Indang, Cavite. What is Indang, Cavite? One step from Indang, he's already in Batangas. Okay? And from Batangas, General Malvar, who's friendly with the two, Bonifacio and Aguinaldo, Malvar would then help him go to the other side of the Laguna de Bai to return to Antipolo so that he can join his real people. So what is this? Bonifacio already want to run away from what's happening in Cavite. He did not want to anymore. You know, he did not want to kill Aguinaldo. That I know. If you're going to look at the letters of Bonifacio, there was no talk to Emilio Jacinto that I want to kill Aguinaldo. He just wanted to go back to his camp in Antipolo with Jacinto. But of course, that did not happen anymore. With Antonio Luna, of course, this is in the Philippine-American War already. There is no slight indication in the documentation with Antonio Luna that he wanted to grab power with Aguinaldo, to grab the power of Aguinaldo. So, I guess the threats, although the threats were based on calculated guesses of Aguinaldo or Aguinaldo's men, that what they might do. But as we know, as long as the documentation is concerned, Antonio Luna, despite being an asshole, was loyal to Aguinaldo. Except that some of people in Aguinaldo's camp did not like his style.
Yes.
And this is where the difference lies. Antonio Luna was a Western-educated military man. He was like military discipline at all costs. Look at Aguinaldo. Aguinaldo's men were always faithful to him from the beginning, that they were ready to kill for him. Why? Because he was a local politico na inaalagaan, takes care of those that are faithful to him. Military discipline doesn't matter. As long as you're faithful to me, you will fight for me. So I will treat you very well. So this is where you see the difference. Western-minded Antonio Luna and even Bonifacio, single-minded person, doesn't care about all these intricacies in a way. But Aguinaldo knows local politics. That's the difference. Bonifacio's mind was national already. Antonio Luna was national already. Why did Aguinaldo survive all of this? Because his men were faithful to him. They were treating him as a local politico. And because Aguinaldo was taking care of them as a local politico. That is where the difference lies. And as you know, when you act like a local politico, taking care of your little ones, they will be faithful to you.
That being the
Okay.
case, no, the people are asking, sayang ang buhay ng dalawa.
Yes,
Bakit sila nawala?
definitely. And again, as you can see, as I interpreted this, it's not just a clash of politics and personal interest, but also a misunderstanding of culture. Of the both of them, on both sides or of the fence. They did not understand each other. They did not click.
Sir, in your opinion, who is the first president of the Philippines?
Well, as I said, it's Andres Bonifacio.
Not Aguinaldo.
Aguinaldo is the president of the first Philippine Republic.
But the first Philippine Republic is only in Cavite, not the whole Philippines.
The first Philippine Republic was in Malolos, and
Yes.
it acted as national government, which is okay. Because you can also say that with Bonifacio, he had limited, area around him, but it functioned as a revolutionary government before Malolos, which is also a revolutionary government in a way.
But that
You
government,
look at their documents. So
but
if you
that
recognize,
yes, sir. But that government did not extend to the whole Philippines.
so that's why if you're going to look at that argument, the first president of the Philippines is actually Jose P. Laurel.
Yes.
Not even Quezon, who was not a republic president, although he
It is a
commanded the whole
Commonwealth.
Philippines. Commonwealth lang yun.
Yes.
That's why Mama Ami, my proposition is that you do not lump the presidents together.
Yes.
But you do kasi it's unlike America when we have one government from the first President Washington to Joe Biden
Yes.
in a continuous government. Our governments were different. So don't say Duterte is what, the 15th or the 16th president of the Philippines?
Republic.
That's
yes.
bullshit.
Okay.
You have to count from Rojas if you
Okay.
want to count Duterte, because they're part of one government. And then you have you have different governments. Haring Bayang Katagalugan, wherein Bonifacio was president, the first Philippine Republic, the
Yes.
Philippine Commonwealth, the second Philippine Republic, and then the third Republic. So you list the presidents by republics.
Okay.
That's my proposition. You do not lump them in one list.
Thank you. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, thank you,
for the
thank you.
enlightenment.
Okay, so thank you very, very much, everyone, for being here. And Xiao, we will certainly want to have you with us again. We hope there will be other opportunities. So
As always, thank you.
we'll see Xiao in another lecture sometime. And everybody else, we will see you next week for another session of the history course.
Just one-
Yes, Aurora.
Some people are asking where they can buy your book on Andres Bonifacio.
Okay. Well, if you want a personally signed book, you can order in my Facebook, which is Xiao Chua. Very, very cheap. But if you want a cheaper one without my signature, of course, it's available via Shopee. So you just search in Shopee Andres Bonifacio. You can even give it as gifts. It's really cheap, very cheap. I mean, if you get the signed one with me, it's a bit, I put something there, but with the shipping, of course. But I also have to, to have my own livelihood, right? But you can buy it in Shopee en masse, and you can give it to your kids this Christmas.
Good. All right.
Yeah, we just took away the friar part because it's not for kids. That's the problem. I wanted it there. But my editor said, you cannot put Bonifacio killing friars there because it's not for kids. So I'm very sorry you will not see the friar part there. I wanted it.
All right. Okay, back to you, Ching. Sorry.
Oh, just again, thank you very much. It has been such a fascinating lecture. And as I said, we have more in store for the future. So it's just temporary that we say, we'll see you next time, Xiao and everybody else. Wednesday, we'll be back here.
So,
Thank you very, very much.
thank you, thank you.
Thank
Professor,
you.
so next
Hi,
week,
Divine.
we,
Hi, everyone. Lori. Hi, Miss Vallejo.
thank you. As
Saying thank you, everyone. Mama Au.
we will follow
Bye,
you
Prof. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
next.
Oh, Sir Ignacio Sagas is also here. Wow, it's a very honor.
Yeah, he will be our next lecturer, which I wanted to say. And he will speak on, he will amalgamate his two lectures. He'll talk a little about the galleon trade and Spain's legacy to the Philippines. So
Yes,
see
thank
you
you.
all next week. Thank you for a one.
Okay.